You're listening to Studio Central and Eastern Europe. Very welcome. In our 20-minute podcast episodes, we discuss the latest academic research on the region. My name is Peter Vermeersch, and my guest today is Vera Messing, research professor at the Center for Social Sciences in Budapest and research fellow at the KU Democracy Institute. She's also working on the EU Horizon project RAISE, Recognition and Acknowledgement of Injustice to Strengthen Equality. Welcome to the studio, Vera.
Thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone.
So today we want to talk about something related to Hungary. In the summer of 25, the Hungarian parliament adopted the so-called Protection of Local Identity law, which grants municipal authorities the power to decide who may move in to a municipality and under which conditions. And so this is an intriguing law to talk about because it also says something about the sociological situation in Hungary and the political situation in Hungary these days. So Vera, can you explain us a little bit what this law is all about and why it is so important to have it on our radar?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this is a new law that is actually institutionalizing and normalizing an already existing practice, which is not only present in Hungary, but I would say in most of Central East European countries, namely the exclusion of Roma from certain parts of settlements, especially villages, but also smaller towns. So there is this irregular and non-formalized practice that Roma are not allowed to move into the center of certain settlements, but are expected to live in the margins or in segregated areas. But this law is worrying because it actually institutionalizes this practice and gives grounds to municipalities to exclude formally the unwanted elements in their settlements.
Yeah, the so-called unwanted elements. Because we have to know, of course, that the Roma in Hungary, it's about a 10% minority, more or less, in the country, but usually quite a segregated, impoverished group of society. You would say that the problems that exist already in terms of segregation is then reinforced by this legal measure, or how would you describe it?
I would a bit argue with you because I think 10% is a bit overestimation, so it's closer to 5.
Okay.
I would say, depending on how we define the Roma and what kind of conceptualization we take. Anyway, let's say 5-6% of the population are Roma in Hungary, which is quite close to Slovakia, a bit smaller than in Romania. And if we look at the law itself, we see that it is anti-poor law rather than Roma. Yeah. And of course, Hungary, as a member of the EU, has its anti-discrimination regulations and laws, so it would be illegal to name the Roma.
Exactly.
So that's a law that gives a framework, and then each municipality can issue their own decrees based on this law. So what I did is I went through all the decrees. Out of over 3,000 settlements, 165 issued a decree until now. And I went through the decrees and I looked at the conditions they set for. Mm-hmm. There are two things for which they set conditions. One is to sell and buy an estate, and the other is to move in.
Yeah. So people, independent of what their ethnicity is, they have to match certain requirements before they can move into a certain municipality.
Exactly. So the municipality has the right to approve someone's settling in the so new arrivals. Yeah. And so these decrees are quite different, but the most common characteristics is that they are exclusive. So they exclude certain populations, and these populations are usually the poor ones. So they set preconditions like secondary school degree or regular income or continuous health and social security insurance. Or some of them set conditions to the minors who are moving in. So they need to attend education, even the smallest ones. So even those who are below compulsory school education age. And also, in certain degrees, they say that the children cannot be in childcare services at all. And also, there are some of the decrees that set monetary conditions. For example, they require sometimes even quite substantial payment to the municipality in order to get this approval. And some even say that the knowledge of Hungarian is a precondition, which is, I would say,
language
illegal.
proficiency.
I'm not a legal scientist or a lawyer, but I would say that this is quite against EU regulations.
So what was the thinking of the Hungarian parliament in approving this law? How do they get away with approving a law that is obviously very problematic because it can be discriminatory towards a lot of populations?
Yeah, you are touching a very important point here. The general elections are coming up in April. And of course, the government has been in government for the past 15 years, so very long, and they have 2/3 majority. But the popularity of the government is decreasing, so they are kind of trying to offer something to their potential voters. And this is something that is very attractive to rural municipalities. So if we look at where these decrees have been formulated and put into action, these are very concentrated territorially. So what we see is that in northeast Hungary, these are the areas where most of these decrees were formulated and put into action. And these are the areas where there are a lot of Roma living, and also where the anti-Roma sentiments are the strongest. So pro-Roma and Roma organizations are saying that this is an anti-Roma law. But of course, the minister who submitted this law to the parliament argues that this is non-discriminatory and this is just about the right of localities to their identity, and each locality should have the right to preserve their identity and somehow limit the population that moves in. And his argument was that this is an opportunity to small towns close to big towns to somehow regulate the invasion of newcomers. But actually what we see if we analyze these decrees is that a vast majority of the settlements which issued this decree are very, very small, with a very old population, and also settlements where there was no mobility at all.
Right. And do you see a lot of difference in the conditions that are being put out for potential incoming inhabitants? So you talked about language proficiency, having a secondary education diploma, all of these preconditions that are being formulated by these decrees. Do you see a lot of variation, or is it all going in the direction that a particular population is being barred from coming in those small towns?
Yeah, there are certain patterns that are clearly recognizable. For example, these conditions which are clearly directed to poor people or marginalized people are mostly present in these very, very small settlements which are afraid of Roma coming in and marginalized population coming in. But there are some settlements which are in the outskirts of large cities like Budapest or Győr, or on the border of Slovakia, where there are a lot of incoming population from Slovakia because of cheaper estate prices. There the decrees are clearly very, very different and not directed to certain types of people, but to certain territories within the settlement.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. So it's clear where this law is going and where the decrees are going. Is there any opposition to it? Is there any action of citizens, organizations trying to protest this development?
Yes, since the law is very new and there are hardly any instances of people being rejected from moving into settlements yet. But Roma and pro-Roma organizations are very worried that this is actually about the exclusion of their people, which I think is a quite well substantiated worry. They are trying to do things, yes. There are a very informal coalition of Roma and pro-Roma organizations are trying to fight the law. We see that if there is one settlement in an area, very soon the nearby other settlements issue a very similar decree. So basically in certain areas, people are just excluded. People who are not well educated, who have a difficult position in the labor market, or who are poor.
Yeah, is there some action on the European level? Because obviously this is happening within Hungary. It's not very well known outside of the media sphere, in the international media sphere. So do international European organizations know this? Do they work about this? Is it known in European institutions?
As far as I know, there is a complaint already submitted to the European Commission about that to overview its legality.
Yeah.
But this is very recent.
This is very recent. And the flip side, so what you said is that it's also a tool for the government and I suppose Fidesz as a party and Orbán as a prime minister to mobilize a population in support in the context of the upcoming elections in 26. Does that work, do you think? Or is it just probably difficult to say?
It's like, doing magic and saying what will happen. So Orbán is in a difficult situation and Fidesz is in a difficult situation because for the first time in the last 15 years now, he has a potent opposition who seems to be more popular.
You talked about the negative effects of this law, and you talked also about some incipient protests against this law from Roma organizations. But what is this law intended to do for Orbán?
I think Orbán and Fidesz government wants to please its electorate. And since its electorate is mostly to be found in rural areas, especially elderly rural women, such a decree, of course, pleases them because they are the ones who are most afraid of newcomers, of poor people, of marginalized people, of Roma. So probably he tries to please this electorate.
Yeah. Is there some discussion in Hungary about this law in the media sphere, or is this quite absent and is this only a couple of organizations trying to fight this, or how should we try to interpret the public discussion about this in Hungary, if there is any?
Yeah, there is surprisingly little discussion about it. And I don't know the reason for it, whether the reason is that there is some kind of a general agreement on this being exclusionary and this right to self-identity of municipalities, and just people do not think further. For example, how the price of their property will decrease if will not be able to sell these estates. But also the reason for the relative silence might be that there are so much bigger issues going on and scandals going on. The election campaigns are going on and the whole, level of tension is so strong.
Yeah, the level of emotions is very high in Hungary in anticipation of the elections that are upcoming, which might be crucial for the Orbán regime, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, for the first time in the last 16 years, since Orbán has 2/3 majority, there is a potent opposition coming up, and he seems to be more popular than Orbán.
Do you expect other measures like this that may come up in the months leading up to the elections? Do you think that that we, maybe not legal measures, but maybe campaigns with regard to trying to make the regime as it is now more popular and Fidesz as a party more popular in the face of this very serious opposition that it now has?
Certainly they are trying very hard with all kinds of measures, but he is in a difficult situation because Roma communities are a very important electorate for Orbán. So they always vote for Orbán and they have always voted for Orbán. So he has to kind of tiptoe around this issue very carefully.
Yeah, and play for two audiences at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So this is going to be a space we need to watch in the coming months, because there might be some interesting developments coming up.
Yes. Yeah, and we are watching, of course.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vera Messing, for explaining us so extensively what this new law is about and how it functions in the broader context of the upcoming elections in Hungary. And, well, I hope we will be able to talk more about this at some later point in 2026 when these elections are happening.
Yes, thank you very much. We are watching this very closely, and if there are any developments or good cases, for example, how certain settlements or communities counter this law or decrees, we can talk about that. I hope we will have good cases for that.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.